Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the lineup. My name is Lily Dite. I'm on the publicity team over here at Soho Press. And if this is your first time joining us for the lineup, I'm very pleased to welcome you. We have a really wonderful event for you tonight. We partner with Mystery to Me Bookstore based in Madison, Wisconsin for this event. And I'll talk more about them in a little bit, but we couldn't do it without their partnership. So if you are planning on purchasing a book tonight, we do highly suggest that you purchase it through Mystery to Me. This series has been running now for about a year and a half, and it's focused on highlighting Soho crime authors and giving them a digital platform to talk about their work alongside other Soho crime authors and contributors. Our next event will be on April 30th. It's called Academics as Sleuths, and it will feature an in-depth conversation between Maha Khan Phillips and Zoe B. Walbrook. And you can register for that event now by visiting sohocrimelineup.com. For tonight's event, we are celebrating the latest release by William Boyle, Saint of the Narrows Street, which is out now. And we are looking ahead to Summerhouse by Kara Amit, translated by Nicholas Glastonbury, who is joining us tonight. Summerhouse is out in late May. So we've got Summerhouse available for pre-order, and we can purchase Saint of the Narrows Street by clicking this green button here that's on the bottom of your screen. Both books will come with signed bookplates, which are wonderful. Thank you to our authors and contributors for that. And you'll be supporting your indie bookstore by pre-ordering your book locally. So thank you for doing that in advance. Finally, at the very end of the event, we will be giving away 3 gift cards to Mystery to Me Bookstore. So make sure that you stick around for the end to see if you've won. And we'll be doing a very small Q&A at the end. So over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little thought bubble with a question mark in the middle of it. So if at any point during the event you have a question for one or both of our authors, feel free to drop it in there, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the very end. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our authors and a translator that are joining us tonight. We've got William Boyle, who is the author of 8 books set in Southern Brooklyn neighborhood where he was born and raised, including his debut, Gravesend, the story collection Death Don't Have No Mercy, The Lonely Witness, nominated for the Hammett Prize, A Friend is a Gift You Give Yourself, an Amazon Best Book of 2019, City of Margins, a Washington Post Best Thriller and Mystery Book of 2020, and Shoot the Moonlight Out, listed by Crime Reads as one of the 10 best noir novels of 2021. He currently lives in Oxford, Mississippi. And Nicholas Glastonbury is a writer, translator, and editor from the Florida backwaters. His translations of Turkish and Kurdish fiction and poetry have appeared with or are forthcoming from Tilted Axis Press, Comma Press, Soho Press, Sandorf Passage, Nightboat Books, and elsewhere. He holds a PhD in cultural anthropology and lives in New York. Welcome, both. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Lily.
We were just kind of talking before we started rolling about how similar, and we're going to keep tonight spoiler free because we're still in the early stages of both books being out into the world. But how similar truly these 2 books, although they appear to be very different. There's a lot of through lines that I'm excited to get into tonight. One of them being our theme today is One Island, One Block, thrillers in close quarters, which means that place plays a really big role in the stories that we're discussing. So could you each tell us a little bit about where the books are placed?
Sure. You want me to go first?
Sure.
So my book is set in southern Brooklyn, in and around Gravesend, the neighborhood where I grew up, but also kind of Bensonhurst, Bath Beach, kind of all over that part of Brooklyn. But the book, for the most part, aside from a few stretches where characters stray to other places briefly, is set on one block in the neighborhood, a fictional block called Saint of the Narrows Street. And my initial idea for the book was to write a book set on one night on one block, kind of like Do the Right Thing style or something. And that changed over time. The book is now set across 18 years, and the action does stray from the block a little bit, but in large part we're kind of on this block, and we're in, cramped apartments and cramped kitchens of the main characters.
Yeah. So the book Summerhouse is set in a sort of sumptuous mansion on an island off the coast of Istanbul, in the Sea of Marmara, which is, Istanbul's right on the water, and it's a big sea kind of that it looks out onto. And so the island is called Büyükada, and it just translates as like big island, like great island. And uh, Büyükada is this incredibly kind of lush, green, nature forward kind of space. Historically, it was the islands off the coast were inhabited by non-Turkish minorities. So there's a very famous a Christian monastery on Büyükada, which does appear in the book. But another thing about the islands is that none of them have cars on them except for, like trash collection or like a police car. And so it's this incredibly silent, incredibly overgrown, lush setting. The islands are to most people, they're just places you go on vacation in the summer, but there are a small cadre of people who live on the island all year round. And so this story is set in the house mostly in the house of one gay couple who have been living on the island for 40 years, or for 30 years, and who've been together for 40 years. It's as much a story about the kind of the beauty of the island as it is about the kind of dynamics that play out or get buried within the kind of many years, all the time that accrues in the space that they live in.
Yeah, and I mean both places are rendered in such full color. And I mean, both are very immersive stories because of the place, but also because of these like really eclectic cast of characters that both books include. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit too, and maybe we can use this moment to talk about like the story at the middle of both of these books. But I want to talk about like secondary characters here too. So of course, in Saint of the Narrows, we are focused on a set of sisters, but like I guess in the background of this, there are all of these really like wonderful folky people that come and like really fill out the neighborhood. And like similarly for Summerhouse, of course we have the couple at the middle, but we've got these like peeping neighbors that kind of come in. So can you tell me a little bit about the characters in your books? And do you have a favorite secondary character that you enjoyed working with the most?
Yeah, I mean, there are, like we were saying before, there's a lot more in common between these books than I think, certainly, we anticipated, I think. And a lot of that does come down to, how place and character driven they are, and also like a lot of place names in both books too. So as far as the characters, so the main characters, as you said, are these two sisters, Rissa and Julia, in Saint of the Narrow Street. Rissa's got married to this kind of bad seed character named Severio. When the book starts, she has a baby, Fabrizio, and their across the street neighbor Christopher Chuch Gardini is the other main character in the book. Kind of something happens in the opening of the book, and then we kind of chart the consequences of that, I guess, across 4 sections set over 18 years. And yeah, writing the secondary characters is, that's one of my favorite things to do. I mean, obviously I love writing kind of dive bars, and there's a couple of actually a few different dive bars in this book. And I just kind of love filling out those places with with various characters, and the bar that's kind of right up the block from where the characters live in the book is called the Crisscross Cocktail Lounge, and that's kind of a central place. There's like the bartender is this woman, Widow Marie, and then there's Jane the Stain, who you mentioned, and a couple of other kind of people who just kind of are characters who sit at the bar in the background of the story. And then there's a bar called the Wrong Number that factors in, which is in most of my books. The Crisscross Cocktail Lounge is a fictional bar, but the Wrong Number is based on a real bar, even though it's kind of a fictionalized version of it. And then there's a bar in Jersey they wind up at, at some point, or Fab winds up at. And yeah, I mean, I love writing those kind of minor characters, in part, I think, because a lot of them just kind of wander into the story. And that's one of the great joys of writing for me, is just kind of having something like that happen. Like there's a scene in the Crisscross Cocktail Lounge where this little girl kind of comes into the bar, and stuff like I hadn't, it's just kind of a weird little detour, but I love those sorts of narrative detours, and that's just where I have my most fun as a writer. I think probably my favorite of the minor characters is Jane the Stain, who I kind of is not as central a character as I'd initially kind of intended her to be in the early stages of planning of the book, but I think you can still probably feel how much I wanted her to be and how much I love her as a character. She's not got a lot of scenes in the book, but I think she's got a really powerful presence, and she kind of stands as this, like she could have had, her and Rissa kind of have a little flirtation fling later in the book, and she kind of stands as this possible other life that Rissa could have kind of had. And so she's probably my favorite, and I know a lot more about her than is in the book, because I wrote a lot of stuff about her that didn't wind up in the book. So
yeah, I would say Jane the Stain was also my favorite secondary character.
that's good to hear.
Yeah. Maybe you can do a sequel just on Jane the Stain.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it.
So Summerhouse is is set on this island. The book sort of follows the two protagonists are the partners in a gay couple that have been together for a long time. One is Chener, who is a pianist. He was once quite famous. And then his partner is Fehmi, who is a kind of construction engineer who was quite successful. And they've been together for 40 years. They've lived on the island for 30 years. And in the context of the small social world of the island, of the people who are there all year round, they sort of really worked hard to make themselves kind of essential. So crucially, both of them live in a kind of glass closet. So their relationship is not really, it's almost an open secret. Nobody talks about it. It's sort of considered impolite to talk about it. And so to all appearances, they're just two friends supporting one another in their twilight years. And the book opens sort of around the time of their 40th anniversary, where they have two friends come over, or a group of friends come over. And among those is this woman, Neil Erkutlar, who is a sort of washed up diva, extraordinarily beautiful, kind of blonde bombshell, wears tiny mini skirts, and but is like 75 years old, and is just super catty and rude, and she, I think, is probably my favorite side character. But in any case, the story unfolds after this 40th anniversary. The house next door is inhabited by a family whose son is sort of troubled, who is kind of brooding and angry and resentful. And back in Femi and Shanair's house, one of them develops a crush on Denny's, this boy, and things kind of escalate from there. This love triangle sort of has enormous consequences for both families' lives, and the sort of spider's web of social networks and gossip, like women's sort of whisper networks and the gossip chain on the island is both an obstacle but also an opportunity for these characters to kind of survive.
Which like chalk them up, but like another similarity between the books and like how information is passed between people that are living in like a very tight community. Um, and Nick, I wanted to kind of continue to talk about this because in when we talk about Summerhouse, it's obviously a crime novel. It has very dark moments, but Yi has been vocal about the fact that when writing this book, he didn't want Summerhouse to perpetuate the idea that literature or in literature that queerness has to like solely be associated with grief, and that comes across really well. Like it's also very funny. The like internal thing we say sometimes at Soho about Summerhouse is like we support gay rights and gay wrongs. And it's so funny, and it just really strikes this really wonderful balance between it being really heartbreaking in moments and like laugh at like out loud on the train moments. So can you talk to us a little bit about like how you think it struck that balance, and then what it was like to bring that into an English translation? Like, how did that carry over?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's really no shortage of reasons for grief in the world for queer people, and there really has never been a shortage of grief. And Yeat, as an author, has experienced. So he was a journalist for probably 15 years, and being openly gay, he was sort of constantly targeted by the fundamentalist press in Turkey, and faced all kinds of obstacles and kind of smear campaigns and things like that. So he's extremely like cognizant of like the violence of homophobia, and the likewise the central place that it occupies in the social fabric that he's writing from. And at the same time, I think he's also keenly he reads he's read a lot of the sort of staples of gay literature, the Christopher Isherwood, the Patricia Highsmith, so on and so forth. And I think a lot of, especially the sort of mid 20th century queer literature, and it doesn't even have to be literature. Like you can think about like the pulp fiction novels, right? The queer characters always die, right? And the death of the queer character becomes the kind of resolution of the heterosexual family drama, right? That like this becomes the thing around which the heterosexual family can kind of coalesce in order to, sustain itself. So queer death becomes essential to the reproduction of heterosexuality. Even in these kind of like Christopher Isherwood or Patricia Highsmith, Mr. Ripley is constantly on the run. He's never really very happy. um, and uh, uh, and so I think that Yeat was conscious of both of these things, right? He wanted, on the one hand, to intervene in the sort of homophobia that he faced as a writer in Turkey, but then also intervene in queer literature and try to upend some of the assumptions that we have about whose families need to be rescued, whose families need to be protected, um, and can kind of gay wrongs be like a method to like upending some of the assumptions that we have about the connection between kind of grief and queerness.
Yeah, thank you. That was really beautifully said. And it just really does. I mean, I can't say it enough how well it hits, I think, both of those things. Um, I wanted to bring it back a little bit, Bill, when you're talking about uh, there's a real bar that one of your bars is based off of in New York. And this is kind of like a thing for you where you have kind of considered the Brooklyn that you write about like mythologized, and like what it's like a mythological place, excuse me, that like constantly evolves kind of like between your books. What does that mean to you, and how would you why call the Brooklyn that you write about a mythological place?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, in some ways, it's just me trying to get away from feeling like I have to, write about the place exactly as it is, and feel like I have some responsibility to get exactly everything, or get everything exactly right, which is kind of boring to me. Like I like, I mean, I like doing that sometimes, and I also like, layering that with just stuff that I've imagined and stuff that I've added into the neighborhood and into the place, and then a layer on top of that this kind of mythological quality that growing up in that area always had for me. Like, growing up kind of just just with all these kind of mob tales in the air, and with Coney Island nearby. Like I was those were kind of the main things I was always fascinated by as a kid. Was, I was hearing all these mob stories, and and like the apartment that I lived in with my mom growing up, the previous tenant was Anthony Gaspipe Casso, who was a notorious kind of mob figure. And so that stuff was just kind of all in the air, and I think that that kind of influenced a lot of what I like to do in fiction, is just kind of bring in that stuff that is kind of a little bit heightened reality. And I mean, I think you know I think people use the word melodrama kind of negatively a lot, but I love a lot of melodramas. And there's a lot of melodramas. This Italian director Raffaello Matarazzo in particular, like that influenced a lot of what I was trying to do in this book. They call the Criterion collection of his movies that's out is called Runaway Melodramas. And in one of those extras on one of those films, um, uh, someone's talking about melodrama really just being kind of like taking drama beyond reality. And so I think that's part of it for me. And really just kind of blending the real and the mythological and the totally imagined. Hubert Selby Jr. is a writer I love, and he always called Last Day in Brooklyn had a big impact on me as a kid. And he always called his Brooklyn like a Brooklyn of the soul. And so I think that's kind of what I'm after too. It's just it's my rendering of the place.
I will say, I feel like I mean, I was like Googling the places in this book. I was
Yeah.
like, I was trying to look on Google Maps, like, where is, so I
Yeah, and a
think,
lot of them, I mean, a lot of them are real and a lot of them aren't, which is, I think, I'm having a little fun with that too, because obviously Saint of the Narrow Street is, as I said, fictional, and the epigraph for the book, which explains the name of the street, is from a fictional book. Yeah, I mean, I like being able to do that and kind of mix those things.
And I mean, it just is even more amazing to hear that a lot of that is, for like lack of a better word, some of your own creation, like this uh this magical stuff that you're kind of putting over it, because it feels so immersive and it feels so real. And I know, Nick, you like may not be able to speak for Yeat on this, but do you know if he had kind of a similar way for rendering the island, because it is similarly immersive? And yeah, and it's not a place that he grew up, but it's a place that he has spent time, clearly, correct?
Yes, yeah. So Yeet has some friend, like a friend who are, it's like a gay couple who lives on the island. And so, as far as I understand, he went and spent a lot of time with them. And there are people that I've met as well. So it's like it's
Oh,
Oh, we know Nick has been experiencing some wind where he's at, so he will probably be back. We can hopefully pick up.
that's the power outage.
Yeah, I know there's some weather events happening right now, so hopefully he will be back um, and can pick up that thought.
Oh,
Here he
here you
is.
go.
I have no idea what just happened. Sorry.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
um, anyway, so yeah, so Yi did a lot of research on the island, and stayed, on the island, uh, to really get a sense of the place. And I will say, I mean, like as I was translating, there's so many street names and place names and directions and which way certain sides of the island are facing and things like that. And so having been to the island myself, it was like actually extremely like necessary, to be able to like know when he's fabulating something and when he's not. Yeah.
And I think like in a sense that can almost feel like it's even more true because we're seeing these places through the eyes of the people that are creating the stories. But yeah, it's so interesting. I think a lot of people go into these expecting these places to be exact renditions of the spaces that you like authors grew up in. So it's kind of cool to hear that you're able to like take some freedoms with those things and then make it even better and feel even more immersive in that way. We have talked about influences already. You're both clearly like very well read and well watched, and I know this to be very true for Bill, especially. And it sounds like he is the same way. So, outside of some of the influences that we've already talked about, we've talked about Highsmith and all of that. Can we talk about some of the other literary influences, but also maybe like movies or music or whatever sort of exists in the context of these two worlds that we're talking about? Some extra credit material, if you will.
Um, oh man, so many things. I kind of, as I'm working on stuff, I always have kind of I don't know, my friend Jordan Harper calls it like a spirit board. And I'll just kind of be adding stuff to that. You know, what I'm reading, kind of trying to curate what I'm reading based on how I want that to influence the book, and certainly what I'm watching. And I have like a letterboxed list of kind of all the movies I think that seeped in there. And with music, it's always about kind of trying to capture some sound of an album I like or something like that. So there's tons of stuff. I'm evading specifics right now because I'm kind of scrambling to think of some stuff, but because there's so much. Certainly I think like with books, for me on this one, my French is really bad. There's a Francois Mauriac, French writer, who wrote this book Thérèse Désirou. My pronunciation's terrible. That was a book that kind of came along at the right time, and I think had an impact on what I was doing. I got into I in college I had a teacher who really just did on Theodore Dreiser a lot, and only really teach him to kind of tear him down. And I had this phase a few years ago where I got into like Sister Carrie and this book of his called Jenny Gerhardt. I think some of that, not stylistically at all, but like the kinds of stories of some of his books. Place in the Sun, the great George Stevens film, is based on his novel An American Tragedy. Those were kind of things I was thinking about. A lot of classic noir. I love Patricia Highsmith too. A love Chester Himes. I love David Goodis. He's one of my heroes. A lot of that mid-century kind of, paranoid noir stuff. Jim Thompson. Um, I'm always looking for, like, Brooklyn writers, and there are a million Brooklyn writers, but there aren't a lot of writers who write about kind of, the Brooklyn that I grew up in and knew. So in the last few years, kind of one of the biggest influences I think on me has been this writer Donna Massini, who's a poet mostly, but also wrote a novel called About Yvonne that I really love. And some of her influence, I think, filtered into this book. Tons of movies. I could go on and on. I mean, I was thinking about movies like Boyhood and Moonlight a lot, just in terms of the kind of the time jumps, and really influenced by drama too, and by plays. So and Moonlight was based on a play, and so I think I was also kind of just thinking about Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and all the kind of stuff that had a big impact on me as a kid. Music wise, I mean, I'm skipping over. I wrote an article about the influence of kitchen sink dramas. That's another big thing. The kind of British new wave kitchen sink drama stuff that then kind of seeps into Mike Leigh's filmography, and so all that stuff had a big impact. Music wise, I've got probably 100 songs or more on the playlist that I kind of was making as I wrote this book. There's a lot of music in the novel. There's like Chooch is a metalhead, so there's a lot of that stuff. And there's a famous heavy metal club called L'Amour's in the area back then that both Chooch and Sav frequent. And so there's a lot of stuff like the stuff I kind of grew up listening to before Nirvana changed my life when I was 12, like Tesla and Cinderella and whoever, all these bands that Chooch mentions. But as far as influences on me in terms of the sound of the book, I think I always write to instrumental music, and I was writing for this book. I was writing to 3 albums a lot. Lauren Connors is a guitarist that I really like, and his album Hell's Kitchen Park was probably the thing I was listening to on repeat the most. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's soundtrack for Blonde was another big one. And then I Know This Much Is True. Actually, this is both or all 3 soundtrack, book, and miniseries. The Harold Budd soundtrack for I Know This Much Is True, which was made into a HBO miniseries by Derek. I never know how to say his last name. Derek Cianfrance. I don't know. The guy who made Place Beyond the Pines and Blue Valentine. It's with Mark Ruffalo, and it's based on a novel by Wally Lamb, which was like a big novel in the 90s that I totally just avoided because it was like an Oprah's book club pick, and I was in college and I was like, that's not for me. I remember my mom having it, and then I watched the miniseries and was blown away by it, and went back and read the book and really liked it. And that soundtrack was huge. So I don't know, I could ramble on and on about a million things, but I'll stop myself there.
I mean, so I can't speak, I guess, to some, well, I mean, I know that Yeat was watching a lot of movies. Yeat has a playlist that he put together for this too. I mean, music plays a central role in Summerhouse. The original title of Summerhouse is the name of the song that recurs over and over in the book. And so music is very important to the book. when we were putting together a list of people to ask for blurbs, Yi sort of joked, I think it was I don't know how much of a joke it was on his part, that he wanted to ask Ryan Murphy to write a blurb. And I can sort of see why, because I think that Yid is really sort of drawn to like stories that are both high camp and melodrama, that have a lot of kind of sumptuousness and glitter and
Yeah.
glam, divas, but like, you know, the sort of very high stakes that are also like from the outside very funny to watch. Um, and so I think that there's a way in which, you know, uh, this book is very kind of in the vein of like Ryan Murphy. I can say for my experience of translating the book, it's interesting uh, to reflect, to look back on translating this book for a couple of reasons. One is because this was the first book that I translated that was funny, that had a sense of humor. Like previously, I've only translated just really heavy, dark, sad things, and so this was like a kind of new endeavor for me, like how to translate jokes and how to make jokes land and things like that. And so for me, got a lot out of reading Jackie S's book Daryl, which is extremely funny and really knows how to land like a joke in exactly the sort of right way. So I was really looking to like sort of books that are both literary and funny, and discovering kind of comedy as a register for like as a literary register, not just as a sort of like a, you know, cheap thrills, cheap entertainment register, but as something that can do something kind of literary. The other thing, looking back on this book and the process of translating this book, that is interesting to me is how what I was reading at the time shaped some of the choices that I made. And so specifically, I remember the summer that Cormac McCarthy died, I decided that I wanted to read Blood Meridian because I hadn't read it before. And, you know, Cormac McCarthy obviously writes these extremely, you know, dense, uh, rich in vocabulary, kind of arcane words, things like that. And there are a couple of moments in this, in Summerhouse, where I sort of the spirit moved me to try and approximate some of that vibe, especially at the moments of bigger drama. Yeah, I'll stop there.
You brought up the original title of Summerhouse, which I wanted to ask you about, because there's kind of like some hidden meaning in the Turkish title that didn't necessarily translate into the English title. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the Turkish title is Deniz Ne Kadar Güzel, How Beautiful the Sea. And the play on words there is that the boy in the book who moves in next door is named Deniz, which is the word for sea. And so anytime that the word Deniz anytime the boy's name is said, it's also sort of hints at or gestures at the sea. And this is the title of a sort of bandstand style Turkish song from I would say, the early 70s. And it's a Turkish rendition of an old Elvis tune with new lyrics by Orhan Gencebay. And the song makes a number of appearances, but the difficulty with getting the title, keeping the same title in English, was how to preserve the double entendre of Deniz, the boy's name, and Deniz as sea. Um, and yeah, it's, I mean, I think we found ways to highlight that in the text, hopefully. But it, it's, uh, it's a lot easier to sort of get the gimmick if you read Turkish.
Yeah, and I just think that's such a cool tidbit for people that would not have read the Turkish novel, but I feel like it adds a lot of depth. And then when you know that, and then you go into the book, I think you can really start to recognize. those patterns, which is kind of cool. We are coming up on the end here pretty soon. So if you have any questions for Nick or Bill, please feel free to drop those over there on the right-hand side. And before we end, I would really love to know what you all are, what's next? Which I know everybody hates that question because you're like, I just did this big thing. Why do we have to talk about what's next? But I'm going to ask it anyway. So what are you working on? And it's okay if the answer is just dinner tonight.
I mean, I'm working on a new novel, but I don't know, usually kind of superstitious about talking about stuff before I finish it. So I mean, I don't know if it's going to fall up. I'm still at a place where I don't know if it's going to fall apart. But I'm feeling okay about it right now, and it's set in 1991, and just it's set over like, as of now, it's going to be set over like a day or day and a half, because I take a break from messing with time the way I messed with time in Saint of the Narrow Street. Usually in my other books, I've always kind of written over compressed time frames, and I was trying to do something different with Saint of the Narrow Street, but I'm going to slip back into sticking with a nice tight day and a half time frame. So yeah, I mean, and set in southern Brooklyn, and it's actually set around the block from Saint of the Narrow Street. So Saint of the Narrow Street exists in this book too, but it's not where the action of the book is set.
It's kind of like you're creating a kind of Yoknapatawpha County.
Yeah. Yeah. I try, I mean, I do live in Oxford, so that stuff bleeds in.
Yeah. I'm finishing up edits now on a Kurdish novel that I translated for Sandorf Passage. It's called The Competition of Unfinished Stories, and it is bonkers. It is sort of about a main character who develops schizophrenia, and the text itself becomes a kind of manifestation of the main character's own schizophrenia. So finishing that up now, that'll be out in the fall, and then hoping to spend the next couple of months doing some of my own writing and trying to turn out the draft of a first novel, which, yeah, also a little superstitious, so I'll keep my cards close on that. But
yeah, that's so reasonable. Thank you for telling us anyway, giving us a sneak peek. We have Catherine wrote in and said, what have you found is the most interesting or surprising part of the book release versus other parts of the publishing process?
I mean, just if getting to talk to readers and booksellers, and I mean, writing is and translating, I'm sure too, can be a pretty lonely occupation venture. So actually being out in the world, whether it's at an event or even just kind of online, and hearing from people who are actually taking the time to read it and think about it and comment on it, that's always exciting, and just takes things to a different place for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I mean, as a translator, so I think I mentioned I submitted the proposal for this book in 2021 or 2022, and it's only just now coming out. So I've spent already several years thinking with and working on and mulling over this book. And to me, it's always sort of, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance that happens where you've spent so long with a book, and then everyone else is excited to like be invited into it, and you're like, okay, I want to move on from this book. So I don't know if that's been your experience, Bill.
Yeah, no, I it is. I mean, I think I'm in that I'm kind of in that place with it right now where this, after the book comes out, and you're trying to work on something new, and kind of almost a little bit of a depression sets in, or something, which I guess is just a natural thing.
It's kind of postpartum, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're just kind of like pushed it out into the world, and existed in that. For this book for me was, kind of like a 5-year process
Mm.
between like the earliest version of the first draft and the publication of it as is. So I was kind of in that, in the world of the book and with those characters for a long time. And I think they still the characters are still rattling around in my brain, but I also am
Mm.
like, trying to think about this new thing.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, Nick, do you, I mean, as far as translation, I read a lot of literature in translation. I don't speak or read any other languages, but I'm really interested in the art of translation, and I have a couple of translator friends. And I mean, sounds like you like, going to the island and doing the level of work you did. I mean, is that the normal approach for you? Are you able to do that? Because a lot of people I know who translate stuff translate, stuff that is older.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to the island specifically to like
Okay.
research for the book. It's just it's like a very popular kind of
Okay.
destination, like day trip from Istanbul, where I spent a couple years living.
Okay.
Um, so, but yeah, the I um, the translation process, it often does feel like you're moving through a room, like a dark room, and feeling for the furniture and feeling for um, anything that you're going to trip on, and just
Yeah.
you have to sort of make your way in that darkness until the whole thing becomes clear to you. And I mean, it can be fun, but it's often, unless you've been to the place or know the kind of the setting, it can feel a bit unmoored.
Yeah.
I really love that about how it feels like moving through a dark room. I was just writing it down. That's a really good way to describe it. Um, any like parting thoughts? Thank you guys so much for taking your time to chat with me today.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying to you guys before, I just spent the last few days immersed in Summerhouse. So I was really, excited to get to read it, and loved it, and was totally, surprised by how much these two books had in common. And yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I had so much fun. I mean, fun. It's a heavy book at points, but it's a great read. And I was also just so um, carried along by the twists and really um, drawn to the kind of parallels that it has with Summerhouse and its concerns with masculinity and
Yeah.
violence and doing what it takes to keep a family together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still like really kind of blown away by how well they pair. So thanks, Lily.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for
Yes,
yeah,
two
thanks for putting us together.
wonderful books to add to your summer reading list or your reading list now, and then waiting for Summerhouse to come out. We will
I'll say it's a book for all seasons,
yes. It
taking place as it does in different seasons.
is kind of a unique experience to read them close together, though. You really
Mm.
like carry over the themes, I think. Okay, let's talk about the gift card winners, right? That's the fun part of this. Um, our first winner of a $25 gift card to Mystery to Me is Alma. Congratulations, Alma. We will email you, Elizabeth, and I will email you with how you can claim your gift card just right after this. And then for a $50 gift card to Mystery to Me is H. Sino. Congratulations. And then our $75 gift card goes to Ralph Carmosino. So thank you, everybody, for joining. We always have a blast, and it's great when we're able to get two authors who are so on the same page. Author and translator / author to be. Nick. Thank you for spending your night with us. We will be back April 30th with Zoe B. Walbrook and Mahakan Phillips to talk about academics as sleuths. And until then, everybody stay safe. And thank you for being here. Bill and Nick, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll see y'all next time.
Yeah. Thank you.